Welcome to Truth Telling with Elizabeth DeAlto, the podcast dedicated to focusing on the truth that is always evolving within us and around us, where we explore the potentiality of truth as a highly esteemed value at a time in history when most people have more on their plates than any one human should. If you're new to me, full expression is my jam. Some words people have used to describe me range from speaker, trainer, coach, healer, writer, spiritual advisor, teacher, podcaster, and someone even called me their soul Sherpa once. I'm less concerned with titles or labels and more interested in results, change, and creating a world we want to, can, and are proud to live in. A kinder, gentler, more curious, collaborative, reverent world where people respect each other's backgrounds, experiences, and truths. They trust in themselves, in life, and recognize that we need each other. And they know how to cultivate healthy relationships to true power, not the very unhealthy kind of power our current culture is predicated upon. Speaking of our culture, there's a lot of noise and ignorance in our current culture, and this show aims to cut through that by exploring the truths of a diverse range of incredible voices. From authors, artists, creatives, and educators to activists, speakers, and those in various scientific and esoteric fields, our guests hail from cultures and countries all over the world. We post a new interview every Monday, and if you want to keep up with the show notes and quotes from our guests, you can follow me on Instagram at Elizabeth DeAlto. You can expect a wide range of topics when you tune into this show. Everything from health, communication, money, success, parenting, desire, sex, love, and spirituality, to making pivots and transitions in life, and topics related to psychology, storytelling, gender and race issues, emotional intelligence, activism, advocacy, and much more. A few disclaimers. No episode of the show is meant for everyone, and every episode is meant for whoever needs it on the right day at the right time. Not all guest views will reflect my own, and that's intentional. We don't learn, grow, heal, or improve by staying in our comfortable bubbles with all of our people who look, think, or live exactly how we do. If you love what you hear and find it useful and inspiring, the best way to show your appreciation is to share the episode, subscribe to the show, and leave us a rating and review wherever you listen in from. Thank you so much for being here with me. Here we go. This is episode number 261 of Truth Telling with Elizabeth DeAlto. And before we dive into today's episode, which I am extremely excited to share with you, by the way, I just want to remind you of a couple of things that we have going on over at wildsoulmovement.com, over on the Patreon, and of course, our trust assessment. So first things first is the trust assessment. If you're someone who considers yourself a seeker who is personal growth oriented and you've been doing your work on yourself, the trust assessment is an amazing way to measure your progress and see how well your work is actually working. So head on over to thetrustassessment.com. You could take it for free, or you can upgrade yourself for an advanced report and even a advanced workshop with me if that's something you're interested in. The next thing we have going on is our Patreon. I'm so excited about this. I'm posting 2 bonus podcast episodes every month, 2 Wild Soul Movement sessions, and as well as writing some deeper essays that I am not posting anywhere else on the internet except for our private Patreon community. So if you'd like to get in on those things, head on over to patreon.com/Elizabeth Untamed. That's patreon.com/Elizabeth Untamed. Now for today's show, our guest is JLove Calderon, and JLove is a social entrepreneur, activist, author, coach, creator, producer, and director of TV and film. Storytelling and justice are at the heart of her work, and this conversation is so moving. I highly recommend listening when you could be fully present and take some notes. I love this woman's heart so much and her gentle and clear way of talking through hard topics. She explains the historical movement of colorblindness and shared her personal journey as an activist for over 20 years, as well as some hard truths that she's had to face along the way, and the many valuable lessons she learned from her time in gangs and the hip-hop industry as a white woman. Her big truth was that most of her life decisions were based on unhealed trauma and limiting beliefs. From there, we discussed how to navigate racism, spiritual bypass, and privilege, how to educate without shaming, and how to unpack your privilege without dulling your light. Enjoy and share this one far and wide. Thank you so much, as always, for being here, and let's get into today's show. Our guest today is named JLove, which I just want to say over and over again until the end of time. Best name ever. How are you, JLove?
Hey, I'm so good. How are you doing?
So what is it? That's initials for something? That is your actual birth given name? Tell me a little bit more about the name.
So the name JLove was given to me by the hip hop community when I was 19 years old. And I was given that name because I love love. And I got my start in hip hop as a graffiti artist. I was one of the first female graffiti artists in my hometown of Denver, Colorado.
Oh my God.
And they allowed me in the crew because, as my mentor said, you got heart. So the thing around like just going all in all the time with full love, full heart has always been my thing. And so I'm very blessed that the community gave it to me, and I honor that. And that feels like my true calling in life. So it's very aligned for me.
And you do. I'm excited to talk about the way you bring love to places that really, really need it. So the first question that I ask everyone is, what's a truth that's having a big impact on your life right now?
Yes. It's a beautiful question. And I've been giving it a lot of thought. And what I wanted to offer today is that I recognize, and I'm sitting in the fact that most of my life decisions have been based on unhealed trauma and limiting beliefs. And that I can trace that back all the way to my childhood, and am really now beginning to understand or overstand how that's impacted everything in my life. Almost like everything in my life has been built upon a lie.
Yeah. This is a big truth. So for anyone listening, JLove said, I've been giving this a lot of thought because when we switched the podcast, we rebranded the show in January. And the first question I used to ask people was, what do you love about being a woman, or what do you love being a man? And I wanted to get away from that for two reasons. First of all, not everyone fits into the binary, but also it didn't feel like where we were going anymore. But when I would ask people that, I would never send the question ahead of time because there's something about it was just more simplistic. But with this question, we realized we have to let people think about it because otherwise every interview would start with this long pause.
Yeah, because it's a profoundly simple yet profoundly deep question.
Yeah.
That gets to the heart of everything that matters.
It does. And thank you so much for sharing something that feels very tender and real. And I want to say I can relate big time because something that just like blasted me over the last, I want to say like 8 or 9 months around this too, was how I'd been making so many choices impulsively, thinking I was listening to my intuition, not realizing that my intuition needs a little more time to stew, but my impulses are very sharp. But my impulses are often coming from my trauma, my conditioned trauma responses to things.
Right, absolutely. Which is the truth of it. If you look at personal development transformation, it's like the first thing that happens for us is whatever our pathway says, our mindset says is what our impulse is based on, right? So if we have a faulty or a limiting mindset, then that's what we're basing our decisions on. Unconscious, unexamined beliefs that are driving all of our decisions.
So you used a word that I've never heard before. You said understand or overstand. What is overstand?
You know, it's not my word. It's the hip hop community's word. But it's all about, like, if you look at just the core lineage of understand, that's typically not what we want to connote. Overstanding is like, I get you, sis. Like, I so get you. Like, I overstand that.
I love that.
Yeah, it's just coming from another perspective of like just words. You know, words and language are powerful, and language is liberatory. Language confines us or frees us, and so being conscious of our vocabulary and what we're speaking is important to me. And so I'm taking the liberty to shift conversations where I can. Like my favorite term is bloom through instead of breakthrough.
Oh, yeah. Giving us all these new terms.
And that was because when I was doing the first bit of healing work around some childhood trauma, my Pilates teacher was saying, like, everything for you is hard. Like every single thing, like even your healing is hard, JLove. And is that what you want? And I'm like, I'm so tired of lessons coming from hardship and pain.
Yes.
And she's like, well, start with your language. So instead of a breakthrough, what can it be? And it just came to me, bloom through.
Can I use that? Do I have your permission?
Please. Yes, absolutely.
It feels so good. Like even in my body, like that space between like your heart and your solar plexus that I don't know about for others, but for me, like that space gets easily jammed up. It just goes like, like the pathway kind of opens. Yes, bloom through. I don't want to break through shit anymore. I want to bloom through. Yes. Hallelujah. Sorry, keep going. You said another word.
The other one that's really important for me is instead of deadline, I use liveline. And that's because I found out that deadline comes from the prison industrial complex. And deadline, literally the history of it is that it was the next person that was going to be executed would be on the deadline. I'm like, I am not trying to support the prison industrial complex.
No.
And support murdering people. No. So like, and that's just in our vocab. Like I say that like 50 times a day. So now I say liveline. It does get a little tricky because vocabulary is a form of communication and I have to communicate all day long.
Yep.
But what I've done is I'm like 95% just saying to the people I'm working with, just FYI, when we talk about deadlines, I say livelines because of this, and I keep it kind of quick and move it along to ensure that we're on the same page because we have to communicate.
Yeah.
But I find that most people, like this is a lot of information we don't know. And so most people are very open to it and are like, oh shit, well, I don't want to support that either.
Yes. I appreciate this. First of all, I am a word geek. I'm loving that this is one of the things that is emerging in the conversation so far. But also more specifically in terms of like the origins of so many socially accepted terms that are really not okay. So a couple years ago when I started to get more conscious around cultural appropriation, but also, these terms that are actually offensive that I didn't know. One of the terms that I used, actually one of my videos that someone pointed out to me and then we went back and edited out was Indian giving. I had it was just like a thing, you know what it means. Right. And I was like, oh my God, don't use that. And I remember listening to Brene Brown's most recent book, Braving the Wilderness, where she tells a story about she used the term gypped. And someone came up to her afterwards to say, like, that's super offensive to this culture. And she literally had no idea.
Right. Absolutely.
And, I had never heard that before about the word deadline. And what I really appreciate about what you just said, though, is that you'll take a moment to just let people know, like, hey, this is what I use and here's why. Yeah. Doesn't have to be a big dramatic thing.
Exactly.
And I love the way this happens. I usually batch interviews. So the interview I just had, like 15 minutes before yours, one of the last things we were talking about was educating without shaming.
Yes. Yes.
And
Beautiful.
It sounds like that's exactly what you're about.
Absolutely. It's calling in, not calling out. Yeah. Right. And this is something that we do in organizing around nobody can be their best self if they're operating from a place of shame, guilt, or pain. So if we want to win in terms of racial justice, in terms of smashing white supremacy, of having a world where every human being has the opportunity to reach their highest and best, no matter their skin color or their zip code or their gender, then we really have to get clear that we're not going to win by shaming people. That's not a practice. I mean, that we have to move past that and figure out how do we call somebody in so that they can start to want to learn, grow, shift, and change, and that's the call in culture.
And I love that because this is what you do. This is one of the reasons I was so excited to have you on the show, because I feel like there's a lot, and I'm not saying this to be judgmental. It's just an assessment that right now there is a lot of like pop-up activists online. And I don't know if they've made a lifelong commitment. I don't know if this is going to be like, they're going to keep it up in their conversation. Some people might even think that about me. For me, it's actually something I've always been passionate about. I just didn't know how to do or how to go about or whatever. Mm-hmm. And because I'm a privileged person, it was easy for me to not engage as long as I didn't know. But there reached a tipping point within the last year and a half where I was like, listen, even if I mess this shit up, I'm going to do it. Because I can't not anymore. But so for people like you who like this is your life, and so you have so much more experience with this, I'm so curious where it happens that maybe you call someone in. I guess the way I want to ask this is, how do you navigate the constant flood of emotions, anger, like rage that is real and justified, with calling people in and doing it in a way that is conducive to growth and change and healing and having people hear you and understand? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that it's all about doing the personal work always. Like I have to consistently do my personal work in order to be a right container to support the growth and transformation of other human beings. So the first thing I would say is like deep commitment to self-practice. And that means always checking my own privilege, always checking my ego, reminding myself I am flawed, and continuing to grow in that work so I can be grounded. Once I have that grounded sense of being an embodiment in who I am as a human and why I'm here and my purpose, everything else becomes easier because I'm ready to engage. My purpose is to support freedom and liberation for all people on the planet, period. Every single day that I draw breath, that is what I'm here to do and bring by any means necessary. So if I bring that into the conversation, I'm more able to handle whatever's coming at me, whether it be rage, whether it be a personal attack, whether it be apathy, whether it be, fuck you, bitch, get the fuck out my face. Whatever that is, I can hold because I also understand or overstand the conditioning that has happened in our country, which is interesting, Elizabeth, because it's actually tied to my truth that I said in the very beginning, like that everything's built on a lie. That's the exact same truth of America.
Girl. Yeah. That's how I react to deep truth sometimes.
That was so great. That was so great. Every single thing in this country has been built upon a lie. And so it's like if I look at a parallel journey of like my life has been built on the lie of unhealed trauma and limiting beliefs. Well, so has America. And the original lie is that race is real. That's the original lie because and people live and die by that lie every single day and have since the beginning of our country. So, it's just really important to understand that whoever individual is coming at you, with you, for you, has been under those same conditions. And so operating from a place of deep understanding, love, compassion, commitment, and honoring that person's journey and path is the best that I can do and be that open channel and offer everything that I can with the hopes that they can tap into, because I prefer rage over apathy, actually. I prefer rage over apathy.
I'm with you. I think apathy is way more dangerous. Yep.
Yeah, apathy is the worst. But if I can tap into the rage and channel the rage, girl, we onto something at that point.
I'm with
We're
you.
Really onto something.
I'm all about taking that and shifting it. That it's not inertia. Whatever, just create some momentum. I got all this energy built up over here. It might not be the best kind of energy, but like if I could redirect it to something else, we still have that force. Yeah. So I'm sure that some people listening heard you say every single thing in this country has been built on a lie, and they're like in their brain trying to find some shit that was not built on a lie. And that's okay. People know the show is called Truth Telling. They know we talk about uncomfortable things all the time. So however you're handling that on the other end, for those of you who are listening, it's good, right? And remember, like, don't shut down. If you're feeling defensive, like, look at why. So, but I would love to hear you say more about what you mean exactly by race is real.
No, what I'm saying is that race is a lie. Racism is real. So race is a social construct. Cool. Race is a social construct. There's no such thing as race. Racism is very real and alive, as you know. But the concept of why we have racism has been built on a social construction in order to divide humans.
Yeah.
And, the origins, that most people know about it, the origins are around control, power, property, and wealth. And so, the issues that we're coming up against are that people are unable or unwilling to face that truth. And until we can face that truth together as a country, then we will not be able to move forward together as a people. And what you're seeing right now is people digging in their heels as people are working to protect white identity and white heritage and all this thing. And it's still deeply connected to a falsehood.
Yeah.
Which is that there is a black race, there is a white race, it doesn't exist. We are a human race. And that might sound corny or Pollyannish, but that's a scientific fact.
Yeah.
And what would happen, it's like, people have done experiments before, Elizabeth. I'm sure you've heard of some that like if you looked at skin color the way that you looked at eye color, and like 1 week, everybody that had brown eyes was discriminated against, what would happen? Or hair color. MIA, the hip hop artist that I love, did an incredible video, I think like 4 or 5 years ago. I don't know if you saw it. It was really controversial. And in the video, everybody with red hair was being assassinated.
Wow, I did not see that.
Including children.
Wow.
In this video. It was so disturbing yet so powerful, because this is what's happening in our country. Little brown and black children are being killed in the streets by police. Like, this is happening in our country. And when you see the video with white people with red hair and the terror and the horror and the sadness, I mean, I was crying the whole time. I'm like, I can't even believe this shit, but it's the same concept. Hair color. What?
Yeah.
Well, skin color. I mean, white isn't even a skin color. Like, nobody, you see what I'm saying?
I do. And what I appreciate about this thread that we're pulling here is one of the things that has helped me to have a more deeper understanding of race relations, if you will, because I forget who exactly it was. I've seen it in a few different contexts. Someone pointed out how white women are able to see how they're impacted by men. And they're able to say, that's not okay, that's misogynistic. And yet, if we just go, oh, but look how similarly some of the things that we do to people of color are, then we can go, oh, damn, it's actually the same thing, right? So actually drawing what might seem like this ridiculous example, like all the people with the red hair, but that literally is not different than all the people with the dark skin.
Right. Absolutely.
Or there was something else along these lines recently. It was just in my head, and I think I'm kind of losing it. I'll come back to it if I think of it. But I think, it was on social media. A friend of mine had actually responded to someone else's post to say, what we focus on expands. So if you're going to talk about hate, we're just going to create more hate. I think we should focus on love. And a person chimed in to say, actually, I just want you to think about how ridiculous it would be to ask a homeless person to love their way into their next meal, right? Or ask a disabled person to love their way into being able to walk. When you think of it in this different context, but it's literally the same exact thing, your brain has to recognize it and go, oh yeah, you're actually right.
And we call that spiritual bypass.
Yeah, we talk about that a lot on the show.
Yeah, and I feel like spirituality and empowerment work for me, which are very important in my life. I mean, empowerment work saved my life, so I believe in it. I do feel like that it's apolitical and doesn't look at structural racism in our country. And I feel like that's part of the reason why it's so hard to move that forward with everybody, is because it's not addressing basic structural racism that impacts people. It's not addressing misogyny or sexism. It's not addressing core things that impact not just quality of life, but life.
Yeah.
And until we can have some political teeth within the spiritual and transformational community, it will still mostly speak to white women.
Yeah.
Now, not all white, I know that it's diverse, and I'm happy that it's growing more diverse, but we got to be real about it. Like, we can't vision, like I have white skin privilege, and there are different things that I can access in my world that is beyond a vision board, that is beyond my mantras and affirmations. It has to do with privilege that is real.
Yeah. And
we have to be able to look at all of that totally. And then, first of all, acknowledge that it's true and real. And then what are we as a spiritually based, empowered community going to do about it to change that so Black and brown folk can have the same access that we have? Yeah.
Yeah. And thank you for using the word access, because I think a lot of people, when they feel like personally attacked when privilege is brought up, they really just don't realize it's like you just have access to things that other people don't have as easily. And I've also seen this explanation, which I really appreciated, which is just because you have privilege, no one is saying that you have an easy life. They're just saying that the color of your skin isn't going to be the reason why you struggle.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. It's not and again, this is where we don't want to be in guilt or shame about it.
Yeah.
Like we want to be in the acknowledgement is that we have privilege because of and multiple identities, right? And we have different privileges. Like I have the privilege of education, right? I have a master's degree. So we have different privileges, and it's all just about like recognizing it, understanding it, and then how am I leveraging that for good?
Yes, leveraging.
That's all.
So you do organizing work, and I'd love for you to share what that is and how you personally do it, even if it's on like a timeline, your origin story. How did you start? What did it look like before? What does it look like now?
Sure. Well, my origin story is the first time I organized, it was as a gangbanger. I was the first white girl in the Rollin' 30 Crips, which is a black gang in, throughout LA, mostly West Coast. Have you heard about the Crips and the Bloods?
Yep.
So when I was 16, the boy I fell in love with was a co-founder of the Crips. And that's where I did my first organizing. And the organizing was around ensuring that my friends could eat. And it was a simple thing. In Denver, Colorado at the time, it's when crack cocaine hit the streets. And so what was happening is that there was a community that was addicted to drugs, and the people that were impacted were my friends. And the only access we had as teenagers was, okay, so my friend doesn't have food. How are we going to get food? We don't have any money. So that was my first organizing. And then shortly after that was around graffiti and how do we organize a crew to put messages on the wall that says we are here and we're not going to be quiet. And then I went into Universal Zulu Nation, which is a hip hop organization, the longest standing hip hop organization that exists. And I was rocking as a Zulu queen. And that was about organizing young people to really get in touch with their power through the mission of hip hop culture, which is to uplift and inspire. And that was a really incredible time. That was all on the West Coast. From there, I just felt like the power of music and culture to move was where my heart was. Mm. So I needed to come to New York, the birthplace of hip hop. So I popped my booty over here. And then I started doing more conscious organizing around police brutality and around economic justice. And from there, just grew. I think the most important thing to say is that I predominantly organized with people of color. And there was a time in my life where my best friends of color had an intervention and told me that it was time for me to organize my community. Yeah. And that I was that my privilege was showing up in these spaces, and I wasn't recognizing my privilege, and that it was time for me to leave.
How was that?
So it was heartbreaking. It was like a divorce because it was in an organization that I was a founder of. Mm. And they were right. I think the painful part was how it was done. And also because this was also my community of friends. Yeah. I lost my support system. But they were right, Elizabeth. The issue was because this was my community. So this is where I worked, this is where I played, this is where my friends were. I had no other place to work out my privilege issues. Yeah. At that time, I wasn't hanging out with white people. Like I've changed and evolved, but for a while I didn't like white people. Yeah. I'm definitely in a different place right now and recognize that. But that was a time period where it was very hard for me to hang out with white people. And so basically I was processing all my stuff within a group of color and it wasn't appropriate. Yeah. So it was a hard awakening, but very important. And that's when I started to do work with white affinity groups. And that was all about how do we organize white people to undermine white supremacy.
Can you say more about why it was not appropriate for you to work out your privilege in communities of color?
Sure. The reason it's not appropriate is because when a white person does that, when I was doing that, I was re-traumatizing my friends of color. Mm-hmm. Because it's a similar conversation to white fragility and white girl tears. There's when you are a white person with privilege and you start to process it with communities of color that are under attack, who are fighting for their lives every single day, for their dignity, for respect, and you as a white person are expressing sorrow, then you're asking people of color to come to your rescue. Mm-hmm. You are centering yourself.
Yeah. And
you are asking some points you're asking for education, and you're re-traumatizing racism. And obviously it's mostly unconscious when this is happening, but that's the impact you're having. It's not your intention necessarily, but that's the impact. And we have to be responsible for our impact.
Yeah. Thank you. And again, these are terms, they don't necessarily feel good to receive and to take on and go, yeah, I have done that, or yeah, I do that, or whatever. And I think people really, to go back to something that we started out with, language is powerful. And the ego, no one wants to be fragile, but we have to admit when and where we are.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. Yes. And I want to say, like, I did a post on White Girl Tears, and I was talking about the complexity of it because I'm an emotional being. Same. I'm very emotional. I'm an empath.
Yep.
I cry often.
Yeah.
And so as an empath, like from one white girl empath to another white girl empath, it's like, let's just have some boundaries. Like yes. I'm not telling white people to stop showing their emotion. That's actually going backwards. What I'm saying is that you have to recognize to be responsible. And yes. when you are in tight situations and you want to cry and it's around race and you're in a multicultural environment, you need to hold them tears back, stay straight, and be focused. And then when you leave that meeting or that situation, whatever, get with a white affinity group member, get with a friend, whatever, and then process that.
Yeah, it's just not the place to process.
And that's being responsible.
Let me ask you.
And it's not easy, but we've got to do that.
It's not
anyway,
easy.
Go ahead.
No.
Yeah.
I don't want to cut you off. I can relate to this so much. I cry. I feel everything so deeply. And I'm well aware of when it's not appropriate for me to be crying. So I'm curious for your opinion. One way I've began to deal with it, and I want to know if you think it's sufficient or not, is if I feel it coming, I'll be like, I'm going to cry and I don't need anything.
And you're saying that you do that in an environment that has folks of color in it?
No, the thing is, I've not ever been in that situation, I don't think.
Okay.
But in any situation where I really don't want to center myself, it's not about me. You know what? The most recent thing coming up for me is actually a friend of mine was like talking about his extremely traumatic childhood. He was like in my kitchen. I was washing the dishes and I was like so glad my back was to him because I wanted to just start crying. And I was like, I'm going to hold this in. I'm going to hold this in. And I couldn't. It's like, it's like having to go to the bathroom. Sometimes you're like, right. I just got to go. So I was like, I don't need anything, but like, this is happening right now. Is that good enough? Like I couldn't.
It's better than not saying that.
Okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's like, we're human beings. We're doing the best we can. What I want you to think about is, what would happen for you, in that same situation. And I think it's just like acknowledging where you are and not centering yourself and saying like, even like, these tears are with you. And keep talking. Let's go. Like, I'm here for you. Like, this is how I'm expressing, but let's go. So like, even with that, it's like, what you don't want to do is you don't want to center yourself, take attention away, or also force that person to caretake.
Exactly. And
right?
I think that's the piece that, especially as an empath, I can relate to. Even though I say I don't need anything, that person is going to feel some kind of thing that they want to like take care of me or something. So this is really good and something to work on in terms of, if there's fragility, the opposite of that is resiliency, right?
Yeah. And I love this conversation because I think we can, I think if you lean into that energy and you're just reflecting with that person, I think it can actually be very powerful for them.
Yeah. This is cool. And again, I think that a lot of people really appreciate the effort that anyone, even like I asked you, I'm like, is that good enough? It might not be good enough. But I think people do appreciate that effort is being made. At least people aren't being as ignorant as we used to be.
Absolutely. And I'll do that all the time, even if I'm, posting something, whatever, or like sometimes I'll post something about like how I'm feeling vulnerable, whatever. But I also will put in parentheses sometimes like privilege. Yeah. Because I am a human being that needs to express pain, frustration, etc. And because my community is multiracial, I also want to ensure that I am recognizing that I am in a privileged situation, even while sad.
Yeah.
Right. So and that's the best I can come up with now, Elizabeth, and maybe I'll have a better idea next week. But for now, that's what I'm doing, and we keep growing and learning and getting feedback and then pivoting.
Yeah. And this is why we have these conversations, right? And none of it's to like give ourselves a pat on the back. Well, at least I'm doing this. We're not saying it like that. We're saying, well, this is what I'm doing. I know it's not the best. And we're moving towards it. Because I think one of the things that is so challenging, and I'd be so curious because you have so much experience with this, is there's not a lot of like blueprints or like forged pathways that are effective or like proven solutions here.
Right. Well, 400 years later,
400 years later,
figured it out yet.
Still happening.
I'm saying we're in the land of, we're moving forward. And the organizing work that I do is with Surge, which is showing up for racial justice. And we talk about it all the time that this, we're experimenting and we're laying a foundation that hasn't been laid before to see what we can impact, shift, and change. And we have to take risks because what we have been doing hasn't been working because we're still here. Right. So we have to shift, we have to change, we have to do things that might feel unconventional. I mean, people trip at me all the time that I'm part of an organization who says specifically we're here to organize white people. In 2018, people are like, what? That sounds almost kind of racist. Like, what do you mean you only work with white people? But that's what we do, is because we believe that white supremacy is like, if we can shift 7 million white people to undermine this system, that we'll be able to tear it down. So our work is with white people, which goes back to my friends that did the intervention. JLove, go to work in your own backyard, please. We don't need you here. We're good. Can you go organize your white people?
Yeah, go gather up your own. Collect your cousins.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's funny because, again, to go back to the thing that I shared earlier, how like women, we can see the ways that men wrong us or mistreat us, but we don't always necessarily, white women especially, see how we wrong or mistreat people of color for like various reasons, most often related to unconscious or implicit biases. I had a male friend of mine. I made a post that was for women. And I wasn't explicit about that. It was obvious, but I wasn't explicit about it. So I'll own that. But he like came in and made this comment. It was just straight up mansplain, right? Or It was like, and I'm like, this is exactly what it's like when a well-meaning guy just wanted to like share a different perspective, right? Which normally I'm totally open to. But in this context, like this was for women. Right. And so he comes in, I'm like, this is exactly like when a well-meaning white woman will go on maybe a black woman's post and be like, have you thought about blah, blah, blah? Exactly. And it's like, not the place. Exactly. The thing is, the idea, the perspective, the concept, it's not that it's not valid. It's just not the place.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. You're exactly right. And I think we have to really recognize and check our egos, and just be really clear about where we can be most effective.
Yes.
And how we can be most effective. And that's what we have to rely on, because privilege is really insidious because we can't see it. Right? We're blinded to it. And so we do have to always have our accountability check-ins with folks of color who support us and saying like I have girlfriends and I've asked permission. These are my girlfriends of color. I've asked permission. If you see me acting out of privilege, would you be willing to give a privilege check? Yeah. They have agreed. And so when I'm doing what I'm doing, I might get a tap on the shoulder. I might get a text. I might get a nudge saying, hey, Jay, just wanted to give you a privilege check around this phrasing or this action or something happened. And we all have to do that because, we are flawed. We're not perfect. And we live, white supremacy will not allow us to live in this space where we can just be and do and flow. There are structures set up to continue to oppress people based on a lie. And so we have to just recognize that and then do what we can to just shatter those structures so that we can all be free. And what I want to say also to white women, again, from my heart, is that we are not free until every person here is free. And we have to understand our mutual interest. We have to understand that our humanity is tied with the humanity of others. And until we can understand that it's not charity, it's not helping somebody else, it's not just the moral thing to do. It is literally about all of us being able to be free.
Yeah. I don't know that I've shared this on the podcast before, but a couple months ago, I went to a meeting. I can't remember if it was White People for Black Lives or there's another organization here in LA. They intersect a lot.
Aware?
Yeah, Aware LA. Thank you very much. That's exactly what it was. And it was white people unpacking their privilege. And the conversation was around your own stake. And it was so eye-opening to me to actually trace how everyone else's oppression affects even the privileged, because there's like a hierarchy of privilege. Like you were saying, there's levels and layers to it. Unless you're like the 1% of the 1%, we're all impacted. And,
yes.
and it was, what I appreciated so much is that there were a couple people with learning disabilities and physical disabilities in the room. And that's not something I've had a lot of exposure to. Mm-hmm. So to hear from people how it affected them in school and then trickled into their mental health and like suicidal ideation because of how they weren't accepted, and like the potential feeling of like impossibility of being able to function in society in a certain way was just, it was such a gift to be able to be in a room with those people and hear about these experiences that I don't have, while simultaneously feeling so self-indulgent to be in a space of like having these conversations. It was so, as I'm sure you're.
Yes, it's exactly my point around, I recognize that I will always be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
In my lifetime, I will always be uncomfortable because of exactly what you're talking about. Is that even though I'm commending you for doing the work, yes, that is privilege to be able to be in a room for 2 hours and talk about your privilege.
Yeah.
And so that's the contradiction.
Yeah, paradox.
We have to be able to live in the contradiction of this crazy world we live in, because there, as white folks, like there's nothing that we can do that is exempt from privilege.
Yeah, 100%.
So we just have to be okay with that. Like I have to be okay with that.
So I have a question for you. You're 100% white? Are you mixed with anything?
I'm 100% white, a social constructed white.
Right. I mean, it's hard. I was talking to someone earlier. I'm like, my family who is Italian, who grew up in New York, Italian was not always treated like white when, my grandparents were, and their parents, or even my Irish grandma. Nope. That's not Irish wasn't even treated that way. So interesting how it's evolved over time. But so I'm going to ask a self-indulgent question. What I've been searching for, so I'm half Puerto Rican, and what I've been searching for is spaces for us like in-betweeners, like the mixed race folks, to talk about where do we fit, but not even where do we fit. It's like what's appropriate and what's not. It just seems to be so much nuance. And there's also there's a difference between people who are mixed with anything other than Black.
Right.
Because Black is always going to be an entirely different experience. So
absolutely.
Do you know where the mixed folks are hanging out processing their stuff?
I love that. There's a dope ass woman out of Denver, Colorado, Kimberly Ford, and she created the mixed gen community. Ooh. And she's exploring that very thing that you're talking about. She's Puerto Rican and Asian. Cool. And there's actually, I don't know if you know about them, but there's mixed festivals in LA once a year. That is thousands and thousands of mixed folks come out for a full festival for 3 days.
I kind of want to cry. Thank you.
I'll put you on. Yeah. And she's right there with you. And so she's creating a community. She's creating a TV show. She has, she's just in that world. And for her, it's been so important. I'm really, really proud of her for doing that.
Yeah. Because, it's something I've been also really looking at is representation. And so I've begun to notice there's certain people in my life who I always just gravitated towards them, and I couldn't explain it. They're the mixed folks.
Wow.
It's like that. This person looks like me. Yeah. Even a couple of my girlfriends who literally, a little bit of a darker complexion, but still white passing, freckles, some kind of like ethnic looking hair situation is happening, or like curvy in a way that indicates maybe you're like, again, some of these are like cultural indicators, but not like predictors always. Right. So it's just so fascinating. So when I hear people say, you know, I want to see someone who looks like me in whatever context, I'm like, oh, that's why I've always been drawn towards, you know, these types of people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's super important. I mean, it's all about identity and like, how can we be our full selves? Where can we be our full selves? Where we feel fully seen and honored for who we be, right? Yeah. So important.
And also to go back to something you said earlier, and like, where is it appropriate to be my full self? Because it's not endangering others or putting someone else down inadvertently.
Absolutely, which is the other way that privilege impacts us as white folks. Or white, you know, people that identify, you know, or white identifying folks. Because the thing is that for a long time, when I was in communities of color, I would try to dim my light because of racism and sexism and everything that was happening. And so in those places, I actually, and this is when I was still moving through the process of white development, white identity development. So I didn't know this was happening. I wasn't conscious of it until I learned more and was informed. But like, I felt like my role as a white person was to be subservient, to play a role, you know, like caretaker role, like get the food, do the babysitting, that kind of thing in meetings. And then also to not be a leader because white people were usurping leadership.
Yes.
But if you do that all the time, then as a human, you're not fully expressed. So for a decade or so, I was not fully expressed because I was doing what I felt a white ally should do. And I think that that's problematic. And this is why there's so much, it's just not comfortable, it's dis-ease, is that, and what I'm really leaning to now is a positive white identity model. Ooh. And I did not create that. Catalyst project and some good folks on the West Coast are creating, you know, they have a radical white identity model. It's actually one of my books, Occupying Privilege. And this model is all about like going back full circles, like me as a white person, if I'm operating out of shame or guilt, I'm not helping anybody. So how do I operate my highest self as a white person right now so that I can feel positive about my history, the people that were abolitionists, the people, like, how can I be that person? How do we figure out a different way to be white?
Yeah. I am so grateful that you brought this up because this is something, I was down in San Diego for a couple of years. And one of the reasons I wanted to move back up to LA was to be able to go to more things, to be, for some reason, the term ally doesn't super resonate for me because I don't know. I don't know. I don't need to explain it either right now at the moment. Fine. But I wanted to participate more. I wanted to get in more rooms. I wanted to learn in spaces that weren't just friggin' like Facebook posts and online articles. I wanted to be able to, you know, be in rooms with people. And one of the things I've noticed is that when I do go to events that are primarily people of color, even something, for example, I follow Issa Rae, and I love the show Dear White People, and I follow Justin Simien, the creator. And when I saw that Issa Rae was doing an event where she was interviewing Justin Simien, I was like, I'm there. And, you know, when I went in, they were like, oh, do you want to submit a question? And I noticed, I was like, no, I literally don't want to take up any space here.
Yeah.
This is just not a place. And I felt okay with it, and it didn't feel like I was dimming my light. It just felt like kind of like what we were saying earlier, like, nah, this isn't, I don't need to take up space here.
Right.
But.
Right. And that's okay if you're doing, like, I think that that's healthy as long as there's other places where you are taking up space as a woman. Yes. Like, this is the intersection, the braids of oppression, because as women, we have been oppressed as well. And so for me, because of unhealed trauma, I've been invisibilized my whole life. Yeah. And so for me, speaking up became a part of how I was working on my self-worth. Yeah. Because I felt like I've had worthiness issues my whole entire life. And so that's why I'm saying, like, when I was dimming my light, it was unhealthy for me in the archetype that I was coming from of a damaged human. So it's like that you did that for that one event is cool as long as there's other places where you are like front and center, fully expressed and who you want to be and shining your light, right? That's all about making those decisions around where and when are you fed and where are you feeding.
Yeah. And again, just to keep coming back to that thing, like where is it actually appropriate and welcome and helpful and useful? And where is it maybe inappropriate, completely like usurping power or attention or energy that really should not be on you?
Thank you. And if we can get that right, we'll be way better off. If we as white women can get that right, things will shift. Yeah.
And I think, so one, again, to bring in like another big hefty term, which is colonization, that's something that I'm now understanding as well. Like that mindset of like basically being entitled to everything in all realms all the time, no matter what. I'm like, oh, like there is, like we're saying, there's appropriate times and places for things and inappropriate times and places for things. And and this isn't about, like you were saying, the spiritual bypass of, I am like infinitely entitled by my divine right. Well, not really, actually, here on earth.
That was great. That was so great. I love that. Yes. That was beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you. So tell us about your books. Don't you have like 3 or 4 books or something?
I do. I have 5 books.
Or 5, excuse me.
Yeah, I have 5 books. And they're good. I stopped writing after a while. I was doing a book a year and I needed to take a break. So I've transitioned to TV and film, which I love. But it's all about storytelling for me. And, my theory of change is that if I can create a story that touches somebody's heart, then I can move them into action. Yeah. And so I use storytelling for social change. And I look carefully at my, who's the messenger in my stories. Mm-hmm. And I really think strategically about like, for instance, how can we shift the narrative around young Black men in a way that's very subversive and people don't think that there's an agenda behind it, but just like positioning young Black men in places where maybe white people think they wouldn't be, like an organic gardener, for instance, or a yoga teacher, or somebody that likes classical music. I mean, all these things that are just so insane, but actually white America, like, oh, a Black man does yoga? Seriously. But it's like, so how do we create these universes, these realities where we can start to connect the and rehumanize a group of people that have been dehumanized since the inception of this country. And that's the work that I center on in my writing, in my storytelling, in my TV, and in my film. It's really exciting, fun, engaging, hard, all of that.
I love that. So what is your work looking like in TV and film right now?
Well, I'm really excited. My series, We the People, is going to be out on Revolt, which is P. Diddy's TV network. And that is artists and celebrities speaking out about the imagined nation. What do we want to create?
You are like a Mary Poppins bag of like amazing terms. I'm having like wordgasms over here. Keep going. I'm writing all of them down. Thank God. The imagined nation.
Yeah. So, it's all about like I think most people know what the issues are. So I'm not going to create another series that is diving into all of the issues you have. I want to hear what is the vision. And it was really powerful because in one of the interviews I asked, like, what does a world look like where Black people are loved and respected? Mm. And I asked an African-American man and he was like, I can't conceive of that. Mm. It was so powerful. It was a really moving moment. Like I can't conceive of that.
Right. Because how are we going to create something if we can't even like grasp that it could be a reality?
I mean, because so much of everything that we talk about every single day is based on this construction, right? So like if tomorrow race was not a thing, what would that mean when we looked at our schools? What would that mean when we looked at our prison system and who's in a prison system? What would that mean when you go to the court and the courtroom is full of people of color who are going to jail because they don't have any bail money on a nonviolent offense, because, whatever. Like if you thought these are just humans like me, what would happen?
Yeah, I love that. I love that a lot.
Yes. So anyway, I'm excited about that, and that's coming out soon on Revolt.
Cool. I'm going to keep an eye out for that. I have a very specific question, but I feel like you're probably the person to ask, actually. So I grew up in the 90s, and I loved hip hop and R&B. And I had someone on the podcast recently who was saying, she grew up also, she was a little bit, I think she's probably like 10 years older than me, but she grew up in the era where you were supposed to be colorblind. Like the way they were handling race was be colorblind, which automatically made me think of like the En Vogue lyric, like be colorblind, don't be so shallow. And then recently, one of my favorite shows from childhood, Living Single, came up on Hulu, and I was like, oh man. So I went back. And so to watch a thing you watched growing up now is so different. And like, there's Overton like wearing a hat that like says colorblind on it, right? Which like now in the age of Black Lives Matter and like, here's why all lives matter is problematic. Like, let's not be colorblind. I'm just so curious. Was that a thing? Were people like promoting colorblindness? Like,
it was a thing. It was a thing that happened for a while. And it was, a way to... It was this is where intention and impact didn't line up. Mm-hmm. Like the intention is well-intentioned people who wanted to say like, I don't see color, I don't see race. As a way to try to get over and get beyond the critical nature of what was happening. So colorblindness was just another kind of defense mechanism that was not able to address institutional and structural racism and white supremacy. Yes, because it was personalized. So the thing is, it's like, racism is prejudice plus power, right? And so it's like, individual, if I can be prejudiced against you, but if I have power over you, then I am able to control your life based on what I think of you. And that's the problem with racism, this is why it matters. If the power equation wasn't in there, people would be like, I don't give a fuck if you don't like me. And it wouldn't matter because you're not impacting me. You're not impacting my family. You're not, right? So it's like the thing about the colorblindness was all about like individual to individual. And if we can all just not see color, we'll all just get along. And it was, it came and went because it needed to come and go.
Yeah.
It's not a solution.
It's not a solution. And that's the thing. Wow. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
I appreciate you so much. I appreciate the conversation so much. As we kind of start to wrap up and move in that direction, based on what we've talked about here, is there anything I haven't asked you that you feel like is really important to throw into the cauldron?
So much goodness is happening. I believe in the power of conversation. Thank you for having me on your podcast. I appreciate what you do and who you be. And for me, it's about looking at what we each can do as human beings to move the needle on justice. Yeah. And I really want to say to folks who are listening that I'm not asking everybody to be an activist. I'm not asking people to change their entire lifestyle. I am asking people to look at the truth, acknowledge it, do whatever healing they need to do, and then be in action. And the action can be whatever you want it to be. Yeah. It can be in your family. It can be in your place of work. It can be anything. It can be you speaking up when you traditionally don't. It can mean that you sign a petition with Color of Change when you usually don't. It can mean that you're having one-on-one conversations with other white people, whatever you need to do. But if we could all just do a little bit more together, then change is going to come that much faster. So I just encourage people to recognize that we all have a way that we can support liberation and find your path and make it fun and be in action. Be in action because we need it. We need you.
Yeah, thank you. So let me ask you this last question. People are constantly asking me for resources to educate white people. And so you have 5 books, so go read JLove's books. But I'm wondering for you, are there any books or any resources or articles, documentaries that were like pivotal for you on your own journey that you're just like, this just shifted everything for me?
It's a great question. Yes, Malcolm X, the Autobiography of Malcolm X was my first turning point. And then Paul Kivel's Uprooting Racism is when I really got really politicized. And if you want to go to Surge's website, which is showing up for racialjustice.org, we have resources, we have toolkits, we have downloadable PDFs. There's so much more that's out there. And I mean, there's so much popping off in the world today. So I'll also be down to send over like a resource list of
Thank
books
you. We'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, all that good stuff.
You know, it's so interesting. I've been wanting to pick back up the Autobiography of Malcolm X. I read it twice in high school. It's two books for me that were pivotal, but that didn't, the impact, like the foundation was laid, but I didn't really do anything with it for decades, was the first time I read To Kill a Mockingbird when I was little, like 10. And then, which I read 4 more times, and then Autobiography of Malcolm X. And I'm like, why do I feel so, I just didn't understand why I felt so moved. But I have to reread Autobiography of Malcolm X. Thank you for bringing it up again.
I read it once a year. I mean, because it's just so, like, and, you know, and I do that with books. I feel like I just want to be in it again. I want to be into the original, like, what was the first thing that really got me saying, like, oh shit, I'm white. And, you know, I think I was 13 or 14. I don't know, but it rocked my world.
Yeah.
I just wasn't conscious. Like most white Americans, I was not conscious. I did not understand. I saw like everything with the gangbang and everything was happening, but I didn't know how to make sense of my lived experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just knew it was wrong, but that's all I knew.
Yes, so something's wrong, but I can't put my finger on it. So where's the best place? I'm going to tell people I love following JLove on Instagram. She's one of my people. I'm like, oh, that's going on. Oh, that's going on. Great. Good to know. Good to know. And I have so much respect for like literally how much space you're holding for all the different, like the intersections of all of the issues. I'm like, she is on it. It's like racism, prison industrial complex. This is happening. Yes. The immigrants in Mexico trying to come across the border. I'm like, she is there for all of it. It is an amazing, clearly a person who's worked on her resiliency. So thank you.
Thank you.
And then website, anywhere else you want people to check you out?
Check me out on jloveglobal.com and follow me on IG at JLove Calderon. And I look forward to connecting with folks and continuing the convo.
Oh, so good. Thank you so much. We'll see you later.
Thank you. Okay. Have a beautiful day. Mwah.
And it's interesting because when you look at what people say they want and then what they actually marry sometimes is the opposite of what they've said, and their patterns always were the same. So they were almost never dating their husband or wife. They were dating the opposite of their husband and wife. and then they come to me and they're like, what am I doing wrong? You know, I'm like, you're not dating what you said you wanted. You're dating the exact opposite of what you said. And it happens for both men and women.